Thank you. Thanks. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure for me to be here, especially at law schools, because I think, if you can it's kind of infect the law schools and the people who are going to take over the law positions in the courts and so on, then you can infect and change to do the right way instead of what's happening today. So I thought I needed to go through the process of how this mass surveillance started and how it evolved around the world. Not just, we didn't keep it to ourselves, we spread it like the metastasizing malignancy around the world. But it all started with 4 people: Bush, Cheney, Hayden, and Tenet. It was Hayden, who was the director of NSA, and Tenet, the director of CIA, who got together and said, after 9/11, what can you do? And Tenet told Hayden, don't pay attention to the law, just think of what you can do. So he came back with a statement from the people in NSA who knew what we were doing in our lab, which meant we were collecting everything. In other words, we had the capacity to collect everything in the world already. And we had a capacity to filter out what was not relevant, not just for US citizens, but for everybody else. Because the problem in NSA, I was also the technical director of the Intelligence Analysis and Reporting Shop for the World. So I like to call myself the technical director of the world. I thought that was a cute title. Anyway, the main problem they had with the new, and even back in the early 90s it started, and at that time, all those analysts, and then there were about 6,000 of them, okay? So they were buried by data. Every day's take would come in, they would have their selection routines, those routines would produce 10,000, 20,000 returns. So that's their daily work job. Well, they couldn't get through it. So they were all saying we were just too overburdened by overload, meaning too much data. And they wrote articles about this internally in NSA. And I used them to give to other countries so that they would know that this is really what the problem is. That's why they're failing to stop anything, because they're just overburdened. They can't see the threat coming in time. Well, that was the whole objective of the ThinThread program, was to filter out what was important. And we did that by looking at human behavior and how human behavior, how it is reflected in communications. And so we used a deductive, inductive, and abductive approach. Deductive meaning if you're looking at a social network of the world for phones or emails, which we were, then you could see the bad people, the bad actors, and anybody they had a relationship to. So that meant that we could focus in on filtering out based on the metadata that represented those entities, and only pull that data out. The rest of it, we just let go by. So that gave privacy not only to US citizens, but to everybody in the world. So that was the thing they saw that would help, and that's what Hayden took to Tenet and said, we can actually capture the communications of the world. And I'll show you some of the evidence to show that how they're doing it. Because it's all illegal. It's unconstitutional in violation of many laws in the US. So, and I keep saying this in the US, but they don't do anything about it, It's like, we're all culpable, so we can't really, Congress is entirely culpable with this. So, they're all criminals in my view. I mean, I look at it as they're violating the founding principles of our nation, the Constitution. So that means to me they're all committing treason, and they know it. So I speak out openly about this. I'm trying to get them into federal court where I can really put it to them. They aren't there yet, so in fact they're trying to block what we're doing. The last motion they gave was to the judge to dismiss the argument based on the PRISM program. Now, the PRISM program was never, our affidavit, the affidavit I signed, gave the specific programs that were involved. And the PRISM program is just the upfront charade that they put in front of the public under 702 guidelines and rules. The government can ask the different companies for data on certain people if they have a warrant, things like that. So it's all upfront, but that's what they put out there as the version, but that's not really the bulk acquisition program. The bulk acquisition we mentioned in our affidavit and also in the filing of the courts and all the filings. And what they have done is try to confuse and bamboozle the court into thinking it's really we're talking about the PRISM program when we're not. That's a charade. It's put out there for people to look at, say, our government's doing the right thing. Well, it's not, because in the background of the upstream programs and the other programs of tapping unilaterally the communications between these major companies, not just to get what they ask for, but to get everything they have. When they back it up, they collect it all. Those are the programs that are bulk acquisition. And so those are the ones that that was the basis for Hayden going back to saying we could collect the whole world. It was software we did in our lab. And so, of course, they knew that Ed Loomis and I wouldn't agree to that because it was a simple violation of our Constitution if they had applied it to the United States. We, by the way, were the first targets. Well, you're included, too, in the network, too. So, I mean, we're all together here in the northern zone 1 of the world. Zone 1 was the target first. So they agreed to that. This was generated because, Cheney really loved this because it gave him all the data on everybody. So if he had any enemy politically or any otherwise, any opposition whatsoever, he had the ability to see everything they were doing. Everything. Any electronic transmission, everything. So, and that's basically how they got rid of Elliot Spitzer when he was going after the banks after the 2007-8 financial crisis. He was going after them for fraud. So they had to protect their bankers, right? You got to save your bankers. So they went into this data and found finance going to a prostitute. So that's how they got rid of him. I asked people in the government, I said, well, what was the probable cause to look at data about Elliot Spitzer? He was only trying to apply the law. But they had to protect their bankers. So they were the ones funding all this, and the technology people were all helping to implement it, and the government basically was co-opted in. The way they did that was Bush and Cheney, Bush gave it to Cheney to run. Cheney was basically, this whole program is called a Cheney blood oath at NSA. So that when you signed up to the program, you were like, this is an oath of loyalty like they did to Hitler, it's the same thing. This is all so they called it a Cheney blood oath. And what that meant very simply was that Cheney was directing it all, and Addington was his lawyer, so they had to figure out a way to justify this. So what they did was they got you at the OLC, the Office of Legal Counsel at the DOJ, who basically, the responsibility there is to review policy by the government, see that it's legal, and certified as legal. So they needed him. They also had Gonzalez, the president's attorney, and Addington, the vice president's attorney. These three attorneys were the ones who set up the legal basis in secret, all classified. They wouldn't even give it to the intelligence committees. Nobody knew this in the background. So all these, and some of them have been exposed now, I think by the effort of Judicial Watch and so on. They've gotten some of them out, but they don't have all of them. But it was all done basically in secret as a justification as to how they could do this bulk acquisition of data. And so that was their background, and it was all secret. Even Hayden, the director of NSA, had trouble getting copies of it because, again, they didn't want to release it or have the chance that it might be leaked. So that was the way it started, and from there on, Hayden, of course, this fit into Hayden's plan too. He wanted to build an empire, get more money in a budget, be a bigger bureaucrat, I say, at the expense of our rights. So that started the programs for upstream, and then some of the other programs to do the tapping unilaterally. The upstream program started with, and this is the, it started with the AT&T, which is the closest telecom to NSA. They'd been cooperating for a number of years. This, by the way, overlays the 1960s microwave network for AT&T. It's direct overlay. So not only do I know all of the locations, but I also know all the addresses of the buildings they're doing this in. And I gave it to one of your professors up here in Ottawa or something. I think he was in the University of Ottawa. He published this in his all the addresses. The U.S. government would not. In fact, I gave all those locations to Laura Poitras, who was connected with the New York Times, and she gave it to the New York Times, and they said, we can't publish this. I said, because if we do, and somebody attacks one of these locations, then we'll be held responsible. I said, well, so much for informing the government or the people of the United States. So this is just one of the programs. The other one was, the other large one is Stormbrew, and that's Verizon. And you saw the initial release from Edward Snowden, the warrant request to the FISA court to have all of the data transferred to NSA. This is the FBI asking for it. This is a combination of FBI and NSA working together. The FBI has jurisdiction internally, so they are the ones requesting, but NSA is the repository for all the data. And NSA allows FBI, CIA, and the Five Eyes and other third-party countries access to that data. Because not only are they the repository for data for the US government, they're also the repository for all those countries involved in this collection. And they all use it to query. So it means that all the data, even, they must be partitioning. I'm sure they did that because of, and that's the way I do it anyway, partition by access, giving access to countries individually as to what we think they should be seeing or looking at. That's generally the way things were built. We of course tried to, originally with ThinThread, we tried to say everybody involved with the ThinThread program sees everything in the program. So they didn't like that either, so they ended that. So, but that was the way it started. And these tap points, you see, if you look at them, the little green dots around are the ones that are the surfacing points for transoceanic cables. What that means is, and they claim that they're after foreigners by looking at using this program. Well, if they're looking at foreigners, that's the only place they need to tap, because all the incoming data goes through those cables and surfaces at those points. Anything going out goes out through those points to foreigners. Anything going in and transiting the US goes through those points also. So if you're only after foreigners, those are the only points you need. Well, this basically says that everything it's talking about that way is a lie. What are you collecting in Missouri, or what are you collecting in Nashville, Tennessee, or St. Louis or Chicago? What are you collecting there? They're collecting Zone 1 communications. That's everybody. You, us, everyone. So we were the first targets. So that's the, and then how they start using this data is another crime. This is a violation of the constitutional rights of the First and Fourth, eventually Fifth and Sixth Amendments to the Constitution. First, because it says you have the right to free association. Not under this program. They know everybody you associate with and when. And the fourth says your data, papers, and effects are private, and you need a warrant to get them. Not under this program. They collect everything you wrote in emails, everything you sent around in files, everything that you communicated over the phones, everything. You may think that's impossible, but with the technology today, it's not. I mean, it's actually one of the main problems with technology. It's gotten too good, and the storage now is getting even better. So it's storing this data is not a problem. So that's why they built the 1 million square foot facility in Utah to store it. Now they have another 2.8 million square foot facility for storage and coming on in Fort Meade. They broke ground for that one a year and a half ago. We know this because they see. There are always weaknesses in government. They always have a way of compromising what they're doing. In this case, in order to make a big building like that, they have to file an environmental impact statement. So when they do that, and you look at who's filing it, then you know what it's for. In this case, it was for the Maryland Procurement Office, and it was on Fort Meade, and so therefore you know this is NSA. So, and from that, you can actually see it. If you went on Google Earth and looked at their pictures, you can see they wiped out a 36-hole golf course to do this program. So, and it only attests to the fact that they're storing all the data. Why? Because year after year, the data keeps growing and growing. So they locked our government into spending more and more data to get that and to store it. So that means you have to keep building larger and larger storage facilities. So that's the reason they did that. And then they keep. They don't control the access of the FBI or the Drug Enforcement Administration or certain other CIA or GCHQ or even the Five Eyes, the rest of the Five Eyes. So, and then they use the data in the US, they use it to arrest people. And these are the rules from, this was compromised and produced by Reuters after they, you notice a very small print down at the bottom, it's law enforcement sensitive. That's the classification for the law enforcement area of the US. These are the rules for the SOD, Special Operations Division of the Drug Enforcement Administration, to using the NSA data to arrest people and then to take them into criminal court. It basically says you cannot put anything in written form of the source of the data. You can't tell the attorneys or the judges, the courts. None of them can know, and you can't tell your foreign counterparts because they have relationships around the world. FBI and DEA have relationships with similar organizations all around the world, so they're not allowed to tell them the source of information, but they can tell them to go arrest people at a certain point. So then once they do that, then they do a parallel construction. This is how they take and use this data in court, and they've done this according to Senator Feinstein, when she was arguing the importance of the program back in 2013, and when I was supposed to testify to an independent group of Amos and Conyers, the two representatives in the House. They had organized a collection of people to oppose this bulk acquisition, and they wanted to unfund it. That's one way to get rid of it. So I was supposed to testify to them before the vote. And what happened was when they first scheduled the vote, they put it on the calendar for the Congress, right? The House. And when they did that, the president called a meeting of all the Democrats in the House at that time. So that killed that meeting. And then 4 days later, they had a vote on the bill, and they lost by 12 votes. But I think if I talked to them, they would have won that bill. So that would have been unfunded. Now this is massive funding. We're talking about a $10 billion program for everything associated with it. So, but here, you see, what it is, the parallel constructions, you use the normal policing techniques to go around and find data that will justify the arrest. And then what they do is they substitute that data for the NSA data in a court of law. That's called perjury, right? I'm just a simple country boy, but that sounds like perjury to me. So, and they did this just to cover up the source. Everybody's trying to protect this source of bulk acquisition data because it gives them power over everybody. Power over members of all the parliaments in the world, power over everybody. Even Merkel, Chancellor Merkel, when she was complaining about the surveillance of her phone, she thought it was done from the US Embassy, which is only like 3 blocks away from the Parliament building, but it wasn't. It was done anywhere in the world because her phone is a particular target so that anywhere she goes, any of the tap points, and they've got tens of thousands of them around the world. Implants also in switches, servers, and networks, everything. So they have control of that network. So they can do anything with it they want. They can change data, they can capture it, change it, send it along, delay it in transit. But this program basically produces and puts into courts, and it subverts our entire court system. It destroys the integrity of our judicial process. This is perjury. This is lying to the court. This is government policy. That's the other problem I see. But to my mind, if you want to get really bad guys, the best way to do it is targeted approach, that way you produce only the relevant data that's important for analysts to look at. That reduces their problem in orders of magnitude further down to something that's really relevant, and then they have a chance of succeeding. By doing what they're doing, they don't, and they're violating every law that governs communications, like the Pen Register Law, Electronic Privacy Act, Electronic Security Act, all the government FCC regulation and all the laws backing that. They're violating all of that. So this is what I told them personally, directly in the face. I told them I was really pissed at them all. This is exactly how I said it. Because I am. They're destroying our whole democratic process. Our republic is being destroyed. And we're sitting here and not doing anything about it. So at any rate, that's why I speak out. That's why I go any world and I say anything I want. Let them take me to court. That's where I want them. So that's my story. I didn't get into the FBI because they're just so deep into it, it's not funny. And you can see some of the recent exposures of some of the emails that were written and all that, showing all the corruption and violations of law in the FBI and the DOJ. So I call the Department of Justice, now I call them the Department of Just Us. We're not included.
Great, okay. I'll start asking some questions now,
Sure.
And then we'll open it up to others. So Bill, what compelled you initially to a career in U.S. intelligence? What were your original beliefs about the role and the purpose of the NSA?
Well, I thought it was all to protect the free world and, the citizens of the United States. So I thought it was a worthy effort. I started in looking at the Soviet Union. I solved a few things when I was in the military in 66 to 69, well, 65 to 69.
Well, you were a Russian crypto. You were the top code breaker, right?
Well, I wouldn't, not at that time. No, I was just, I discovered a few things, let's put it that way. So that meant NSA wanted me out of the military, so they requested me. So I got into NSA that way, and I saw a lot more puzzles, I mean, I'm a mathematician, I don't think in terms of infinite, I think in terms of open-ended things, finite problems, everything's finite. The point is, if you can get your mind around it, you can solve it. So the question is, how do you get your mind around it? And that I did with all kinds of codes, and it even I actually worked every cipher in the Soviet Union, so it was a lot of fun doing that too. So that just enticed me to stay there and keep doing those things because it was the bad guys, the Soviet Union, So.
Right. When did your beliefs in the sort of democratic United States, when did that start shifting from your, inside the agency in your work?
Well, I think the movie explains some of it. So if you look at the movie, you can see that. It's free on the web. You can go, just Google a good American, you'll find it. And it was done by a Dutch director. See, I did it with him because I'm still under pre-publication review on anything I write, so that NSA can review it and say whether or not, and I wouldn't have those bozos look at anything, So I said, gee, this is a movie. It's not written, and it's being done by an Austrian director, not in the jurisdiction of the United States. Great, let's do it. So it took me about 3 seconds to make that decision. So that was the way I got into that. But the point was that in NSA, I mean, for a mathematician, puzzles are a real enjoyable thing to solve. And when you solve them, you really get I guess it's like a high when you take dope or something. You really do get a high. I mean, it's really, I broke this thing, but you can't tell too many people. I mean, when you break something, you have to go through a classification review and compartmentalization and all that stuff. And so I basically tried to avoid that by saying anything I penciled out on my desk was secret and I exposed it to everybody. I looked at it because it showed a technique of solving a problem that everybody needed to know, not just me. I mean, I could only do so much, but if I infected the knowledge to everybody, then everybody could do that kind of thing, and we would benefit on a much larger scale. So that's the way I looked at that, but the agency didn't. It was compartmentalized, and we can't tell anybody about this, So that was the fundamental thing that started me to decide that there's something wrong here.
Can you tell us a bit more about your program, ThinThread, and compare it to Trailblazer? So that was the program ultimately adopted by the U.S. government. What were the main differences? And also, maybe a more general question, can privacy rights ever really be compatible with meaningful intelligence and effective intelligence?
Yeah, okay. Well, the ThinThread program had, basically, when we achieved the ability to sessionize fiber optic rates in 1998, that meant that we could sessionize. It was a matter of space and power. Then you could just stack and sessionize everything. So at the same time, we were developing the programs to go through automatically and select out of that flow what was important. But in order to get to the point where you could do that, you needed to be able to see it, which meant we had to sessionize the data. So that was the biggest problem we had, because that gave them the opportunity to collect bulk acquisition. But we had a filter process there that only filtered out what was relevant and what our analysts needed to see. So that meant we had like 3 fiber lines being collected totally, automatically, and we used one common telephone line, 64 kilobit line, to bring back all the relevant data from that collection. So all the rest of it went right by because it wasn't relevant, so we didn't collect it. Then the other part was, if we collect, in that collection we pulled in, if there was somebody in there that we didn't know for sure was related to a terrorism operation or something, we encrypted and we did it with our multi-dimensional encryption process, which nobody else knew about. So, and I never told them how to do it. So, but that meant they called me in when they needed something decrypted. So, but the point was, it was a way of protecting even from NSA analysts who was involved in that transmission. So we protected their identities until we could prove that they were involved in a criminal operation. Once we did that, we were trying to stay within the law, and do the things the right way based on human activity that is a basis for probable cause. And so that selection routine and encryption routine were the main issues with ThinThread. But after that, we had another program that we were developing to monitor everybody on our network and see what they were doing, when they came in, what they looked at, how long they stood there, how long you stay, and look what kind of information they were taking out. And it gave us the ability to, we were looking at developing the ability to automatically detect violations of law or anything else. Those were the three things that NSA objected to. So they removed the filter process, which meant the entire collection came in. They removed the encryption, because everything then came in was totally identifiable. And then they removed the operational monitoring, so they didn't want anybody to know what they were doing with this bulk encrypted data. So, and it was all, when I left, I thought I could go to Congress and just tell them what was going on, which I did. Some of them believed it, some of them didn't. But because they knew I developed this program. So I didn't think I needed to take anything with me. That's why I didn't take any data, documentation, or anything, because it all came out of my cabeza,
When you raised your concerns about the corruption and waste with Trailblazer in 2001, as well as the warrantless spying on citizens with Stellar Wind, you went to the official channels, right? You went to the House Intelligence Committee, the Inspectors General for both the Department of Defense and the Department of Justice. Tell us about your initial hopes in reporting to those bodies, and looking back, would you do things differently?
That's a hard one. Well, the experience, I went to the staffer I knew in the House Intelligence Committee, and that was Diane Rourke, and she understood what was going on immediately. And when she eventually went in to challenge Hayden about it, he told her the name of the program, Stellar Wind. And it was bulk collection on communications of U.S. citizens. And you saw later on in some of the compromises where NSA analysts were looking into the data to find out if their better halves were cheating on them. Well, that's local phone calls and local emails and stuff like that. So they're collecting everything. And that's by some of those tap points inside the United States. There's about 100 of them for the Fairview program. That's AT&T. But there's also there's like 30 other telecommunications companies involved in this. Through the Stormbrew, Fairview, Blarney, Blarney has most of them. That's the tap points from the other companies, and also. They have the tap point input from the Five Eyes and like 9 other third-party countries. Japan, Germany, Israel probably, and because there's a story here about that. The programs we were developing in the 90s, the first one was, would do a DS3, like 44 megabits of data, we called it P24, I think that was the one we called P24. That was the first attempt. And then we needed to expand to the fiber optic rays, and that was P25. We had a little joke here. We also had a P1 program, but we were letting everybody else in NSA guess what was between 1 and 24. We didn't have anything. It was just a joke. We were stringing them along. So we had them guessing. And we never told them anything about it. So, but at any rate, some of the people in NSA, a fellow who was, I guess, fairly close to the Unit 8200 in Israeli organization that's the equivalent of NSA for Israel. So he was passing the source code for all these things to them at that time in 97 and 98. So later on in 97, we had 2 new companies formed, Variant and I'm losing the other one. Well, it's the main one used by AT&T. Those 2 companies were formed by people who came from Unit 8200. So they had the software doing basically the same thing that we had internally in NSA. And so they were producing commercial equipment to sell around the world. And Hayden bought into that. So he spent a lot of money to get software he already had but didn't know. Okay, so, the guy's a history major. What can you expect? So, at any rate, so he spent a lot of money bringing that in to put the equipment in all these tap points, because that equipment would collect everything on the lines. It would take 10 gigabit lines and sessionize everything on those lines. So that allowed them to capture everything. So we could have done that too, but it would have taken an effort from Hayden to help us do that, but he didn't want to do that. So he wanted to buy commercially. So that's what they did.
Can you talk a little bit about the Inspector General's report from the Department of Defense, and then what the Department of Justice did?
Yeah. In fact, this is our complaint to the Department of Defense. Inspector General was basically saying this is corruption, fraud, waste, and abuse at NSA, and criminality. So we put all that in a complaint. And so they sent about 12 inspectors, and it took them 2.5 years to look at inspect all of the information related to that and talk to all kinds of people involved. And they also caught the NSA modifying documents to give to them, as a way of justifying what they're doing. So they were taking out the things that would be, indicate the crimes they were committing. So they did that, and the Inspector General's inspectors found it, and also said in the response in their original it's the DoD IG Intelligence Report 3-Intel-05 or 5. That's the 3rd intelligence report by the Department of Defense Inspector General for 05. But their inspection started in early 2003 and lasted into mid to late 2005. So then they documented it in December, along with all the stuff that we said that our complaint was fully correct. But they redacted and limited the distribution of it. In fact, very few people in Congress know about it. That's what I brought up to Director Pompeo when I went to see him. I said, you need to read that report. You don't believe there's corruption here? Read that report and you'll see it. I mean, it's not... See, the whistleblowers, as we had talked before, whistleblowers bring forward problems that need to be solved that would make the organization better. Mm-hmm. And what they're doing is saying, instead of looking at them and addressing them and changing them and making their organization better, they say, if I do this, they'll see that I have a wart on my organization. I didn't fix this problem, I didn't know about it, and I'm just exempt. So it's a bad mark on my reputation. So I have to crush these whistleblowers. And that's the way they operate, the U.S. government. That's the same also with private industry. They do the same thing too. So instead of addressing it and making things better, they crush the people trying to make things better.
Can you tell us, you've spoken at length about the mass surveillance of U.S. citizens. We're here now in Canada. Can you tell us about how the impacts to people outside of the United States? So are Canadians in communications with Americans similarly affected by surveillance programs?
Yes, and if you looked at the, I'll give you the file of all the locations of all those tap points for AT&T, for example. Some of them are in Canada, so those are all operating up here. The Five Eyes are doing this. That means your people are involved, mm-hmm. And so you're a part of it, just like we in the U.S. are. I mean, we were the first ones to be put into the bulk acquisition pit. Mm-hmm. Excuse me.
Okay, I think at this point, we can open it up and just take questions from the floor. So if we have some microphones over on the side, so just raise your hand and then the mic will come up your way. There's one right here.
Should I stand, Nicole? Should I stand up or?
Sure.
Okay. Hey, Bill, thank you so much for coming. A really enlightening talk, and thank you for all your work. My name's Abby Martin. I'm the host of the Empire Files and a journalist. Quick question before I ask my other question. What is the status of your litigation right now against the government?
The government is drawing it out. In fact, the latest motion they put to the court, which the court accepted, by the way, was to dismiss our argument. It was based on putting forward to the court that the prison program was the program we were talking about, and it wasn't. You know, that's the upfront fake. The back programs, you know, all the upstream and secret unilateral tapping, that's what we're talking about. And so I suggested to our lawyer that we inform the court that they need to hold the government in contempt of the court by playing them for fools, which they are.
And I know that the Trump camp has kind of made the notion of a deep state kind of a ridiculous idea, right? And it's been ridiculed. But talk about this kind of unchanging apparatus that continues through administrations, that there is no differentiation between, you know, the surveillance state and U.S. foreign policy. Why does this neoconservative ideology kind of dominate the U.S. government?
Well, you see, that's one of the foreign policies, one of the main reasons they do this, because it gets all the collection of everybody in other countries and who they're communicating with, including all the members of parliament, so that when they talk about issues they're thinking about and what they're thinking, it's captured. And so they get an idea of what the inclination of foreign countries is in terms of issues. So that gives them leverage against them and how to create an argument before it surfaces publicly, you know, so you can combat it and be ready for it. Or maybe just even change it and influence it.
You know, even Obama was a constitutional lawyer, yet he continued spying.
Yeah, Obama he is a constitutional lawyer. Yeah, I was hoping for more from him, for hope and change, but I'm left with hope. I got the change. It only doubled down on everything. You know, I mean, he just went off on it. I mean, power. See, the problem is this is power, and people are corrupted by power. I have three words that describe everything that everybody does in our government: power, control, and money. That's the issue. It has been all along, you know. And this program gives them power, not just of people in our country, your country, or any other country in the world, but also gives them the ability to leverage them any way they want. For example, if princes in the Arab states go on the web and look at pornographic sites, we collect that and use that as leverage against them, because in their countries it's not a good thing to do.
Oh, maybe right here on the front, yeah, and then we'll come up.
Thank you. Two questions. Artificial intelligence, transparent, opaque engines are now on the market and open to NSA for usage. Can you actually program privacy models inside that?
Yes.
Second question, is there an ethics model framework that exists for AIs and opaques and transparent engines?
No, but I've been giving talks to university computer programming. Like in Cambridge, I addressed their college for computer programming. I said, what you need to do, and not document in the software, you need to implant rules that will detect their misuse of the data. And you have to plan for what I call evil at the top. Because this has always happened. Anytime this kind of power is collected together, somebody uses it for an evil intent. They don't use it properly, you know? And you can't trust people because people are weak. I mean, I'm surprised we made it this far, really, as a species.
All right, here we go, right here, and then next in the center, yeah.
Thanks for being here. I'm just wondering, with everything that you know and you've seen, what is your online presence like?
I encrypt nothing because I want them all to see what I'm doing and saying. You know, in fact, I have a very bad tap on my cell phone, and I keep telling them about it, I keep saying, can you hear me now? Why don't you fix your tap? What's the matter with you incompetent people? Come on, so.
Well, and you've also mentioned that you will, you've told the world that you will never commit suicide,
Right, yeah.
right? And you're sort of very open about.
I made it clear who would do it, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, can we go to the center here? Yeah.
Thank you. The United States has the reputation for being maybe the first and having the best whistleblower protection legislation in the world. Given your experience, it sounds like it hasn't really protected you very much, and I wondered how you might explain that.
Well, see, for me it's pretty simple. I mean, they give, those whistleblower protections do work well for the private industry, but when it comes to the national security area or the intelligence area, they're the exemption to that, and so they don't really abide by those. And the reason, of course, is because they need to cover up their crimes that they're committing, and all the evidence of it is in the databases of the intelligence agencies.
So are you saying then that culture plays a large role in whether or not this legislation will be welcomed and rigorously applied? It sounds like this is a culture of secrecy, cover up, keep the power for ourselves, and never admit we do anything wrong.
Yeah, there's a cultural issue in the intelligence community, yeah. Because protect yourself, basically. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, up behind, Chris in the black shirt there, two up.
Hi, thank you. I'm Chris. Just had a question about, because I've been studying the whistleblowing regimes in Canada, and a big fear that it seems to exist among Canadian lawmakers when they're drafting these legislation seems to be that if we don't make it really hard for whistleblowers to blow the whistle or for them to prove the case, then we'll just get this slew of frivolous claims from whistleblowers. Now, having gone through the whistleblower system in the US yourself, do you think that's a reasonable fear for lawmakers to have, or do you think it's right?
It may depend on the area the whistleblower is blowing the whistle in, but in the U.S., it's up until recently it's getting better, especially with as we talked about, the private industry. But with intelligence, it's really still pretty bad. And yeah, that's a legitimate fear. I mean, you can't allow them to set the rules in private or in secret. Those rules have to be open and debated and agreed to by different areas in your government, and the public needs to know what those rules are. If they disagree, then they would say so, but that's the thing, that's the fear. They don't want this knowledge out there, and they don't want that kind of thing known by the public, who could basically have a revolt against them.
Okay, over here on the cap, and then we'll sort of move this way.
Hi there, Bill.
Yeah.
My name is Jan, and I heard you mention values and laws many times in your speech, and I think that's wonderful that we're getting a lesson on values and laws from somebody who's so technically adept. And many countries in the world aren't hindered by those values and laws, many institutions. So is the crux of what you're saying, we need to find a better way to find leaders who will respect the values and laws, and that's where we should be putting some of our efforts into how we decide those people, essentially?
Yeah, I think that's a major issue, and you need to find somebody you can trust. I mean, who can you trust in the U.S.? Virtually nobody. No politician anyway, because they're all influenced by money and control and all that from different directions, So that's why I thought when Trump became president, this is the first chance we have to correct this. Because he's not a member of a political party, he doesn't need money. All those factors, power, control, and money, the two of them at least go away. The power issue is still there. It does give him the powers that Obama had, that Bush had, but that's a real issue. You need to have somebody you can trust, and he needs to be open and transparent. Obama was opaque, everything he did in secret. So you're finding out some of it in terms of what's coming out now in the U.S. about emails and things that are being written between the DOJ and the FBI and various conspirators of this problem. So
Okay.
I wanted to add something about the whistleblowing. In our case, there's a case of the NSA whistleblowers and Diane Rourke from the House Intelligence Committee. They threatened to indict us for 35 years under the Intelligence Act of 1917, sorry. And they started producing an affidavit, and they told our lawyers they were going to indict us. So they didn't know I was assembling all this evidence of malicious prosecution on the part of the Department of Justice of the United States. So I had all this evidence that could prove in court that they were maliciously attempting to prosecute us. And so that would basically deny that would throw them out of the law altogether. They would lose their law license, all of that, for what they're doing. So I told them about it by, this is a good story, in order to get the message across to the Department of Justice. I called Tom Drake because I knew his phone was tapped by the FBI. Okay, so what I did was say, Tom, these guys are our lawyers telling us they're going to indict us all for conspiracy, And so I said, now, here's what I've got. I've got all this data showing and proving malicious prosecution on the part of the Department of Justice of the U.S. And so I read it to him over the phone. Okay? So, and I said, and I said the FBI has all this data too. See, they thought we didn't have this, but I did. Because I backed myself up, so do many people, I guess. But right now I'm backed up in about 6 different countries out of the jurisdiction of the U.S. and 4 or 5 places inside the U.S. So, anything they do is not going to work, sorry. But so I told him all this over the phone, and I said, so Tom, when they take us into court and under this indictment, we countercharge them with malicious prosecution at the same time and produce the evidence to show it. And then I hung up. And 1 month later, because our lawyer, he didn't know what was happening. I was playing a pull the strings spy thing. But, our lawyer didn't have any idea what was happening. And so 1 month later, first he was told we were going to be indicted. Then 1 month later, they give him letters of immunity for us, unsolicited. So the only way you can defend yourself is find evidence against them and be prepared to take them to court. That's the only way you can do it. They were fabricating evidence against us. In fact, somebody felt so bad in the DOJ that they gave us a copy of their draft indictment. So we had that too as an evidence.
All right, right here in the center, yeah.
Thank you very much for your talk. Maybe I've missed it, but I was wondering, do they collect and store every email, call, and message of everyone in North America?
Yep, there's only about 90 billion a day.
Okay, so even if the person is not of interest, maybe like some student in UBC or something?
Future use, okay?
Okay, for the future, maybe they will need it, right?
If they become active anyway and you don't like the Tea Party, they use it against the Tea Party, right? Or the Occupy group, they use it against them. Or the reporters like Jim Rosen, the Associated Press, they use it against them.
Okay.
So
I think maybe things like Occupy Wall Street or something.
Yeah.
Okay.
Can you pass it just?
Thank you very much.
Hi there. First, I'll apologize that my phone went off. I did switch it off beforehand, so it turned on even though it was switched off. Okay, so my question is quite simply, at what point would you say a whistleblower has crossed the line? For instance, I've been told, but have not verified, that Chelsea Manning led to the deaths of agents across seas. So the question, of course, is if I was in a position where I had the opportunity to be a whistleblower, maybe it wouldn't be a very clear-cut, morally right thing to do. But where's the boundary where you say, okay, this is what I should be doing, or this is what I should not be doing?
The first thing you need to do is consult a lawyer. Okay, that's the first thing. Then there are certain avenues for whistleblowing that are created, like Senator Feinstein said. We did that. We stayed in those channels for 6.5 years. And even then, they wanted to silence us. They just didn't want anybody to know what we knew. So when they sent the FBI at us, which they did, they raided us simultaneously. Diane was on the West Coast in Washington State. We were in Maryland, the 3 of us, NSA people. And they raided us at 9 o'clock and her at 6 o'clock, 3 hours difference. So it was a simultaneous raid. so that nobody could call somebody, look out, the FBI's coming, or something like that.
And you were in the shower.
Yeah, I was in, wow. They came out and said, the guy came in the shower and he's got his pistol out and pointing his pistol at me. He said, what do I have, Come on. So, but at any rate, when they did that, that was the first declaration of war, okay? I'm now at war with my country. So, and it takes two to agree that to settle the war. And I'm not done yet.
Okay, pass right behind, yeah. Okay, so there.
Hi, Bill. My name is Ali Reza. I'm a PhD candidate at Civil Engineering Department and a data analyst, which is something that I've been working on for quite a while. I'm actually working on a proof of concept for an IoT-based earthquake early warning platform for BC. And the idea is to tap into everyone's smart meter at every single house and get some data and produce some sort of early warning for the citizens. So I was wondering to what extent we can push the limits of using this analytics, the metadata that as I've learned from you, the data about the data, to what extent it's not a clear, fine line. There are some areas that I don't know personally if I'm crossing the boundary.
In that case, I think it's more a question of invading personal privacy of people. If you're just monitoring the vibrations and you're trying to correlate across area, then it's not. I don't see that as an issue. It's not because you're not invading their privacy, looking at what they think, what they feel, their papers and effects and things of that nature. So you're not really doing it. I mean, for that purpose. And then the only thing that kind of thing. I can't really think how they would use that, I mean, against a person. I mean, it just seems like universally available kind of information.
There are applications that we're not really sure if these applications can come through because the IoT-based platforms are exponentially growing. And I was wondering, is there any general symptom or something that we can think for the second time and think deeper if this application is violating people's privacy or not?
I don't, I guess, well, my guide is the Constitution. If you're violating any statement in the Constitution or the laws, then yeah, you're doing something that would violate it. But if you're looking at just the vibrations, and I don't see a law that it would violate, or you don't have a constitution, I don't think, but that's the one thing that set us apart, and that's been destroyed. So.
All right. So, Melissa.
Hi, Bill. So it's clear that the data that was obtained post 9/11 was used to inform the rendition, detention, interrogation program. Since then, Senator Feinstein was the driving force behind pushing for the Senate Intelligence Committee report, which has then redacted all of the partner states. But it seems clear that in doing that report and looking at the partner states, everyone on that committee would have had to have looked at this source of data. And so it just seems crazy to me that there hasn't been more information coming out about this. I mean, I know they're politicians that are on the committee, so they have their own self-interest, but that there would be no one within that committee that would look at that and say, look how much harm that's caused innocent people around the world and how that could affect citizens of our country. It blows my mind.
Well, if we had a first investigation of this under the Church Committee in the 1970s. And it just came out recently, of course, that one of the main targets of NSA was Senator Church. So also his committee. So that the idea was that they do this with the entire Senate and the House, also judges and even members of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and the Supreme Court. So they're all being monitored. No one is exempt. So that gives them leverage against them. And when they do certain things, I keep thinking they've got something on them and they're told what to do. So. And that's why they can get through all of this, because there's so many people who are involved in this crime but they have to cover up for each other. If one falls, they all start to fall. For example, this is why Nancy Pelosi, when she was Speaker of the House, said impeaching George Bush was off the table. That's because she was one of the first members of Congress briefed on it. She was co-opted in early. They co-opted the 4 members of the intelligence committees, right? And she was the minority rep on the House Intelligence Committee. So when she agreed to those programs in early October 2001, then she was culpable. So if she allowed Bush to get impeached, he'd say, you have to include yourself. So, that's the leverage now they have against them. So, and the same is true for all those who are in those positions right now. They're all co-opted in, so they have to defend one another. The intelligence, the foreign FISA. I was on the Geraldo Rivera radio show on WABC in New York City once, and he invited me on through GAP, and I went through GAP to get up to it and talk to him.
The Government Accountability Project.
Yeah. And so I was on the phone with him, and we were just having small talk. And then he tells me, he says, now I'd like to welcome to the show my dear friend, ex-4-star General Michael Hayden. And so first thing to flash, this is a setup, okay? I'm being set up. And the second flash comes to me, no, this is the grand opportunity. I got this guy, 2 million people maybe are listening to this. Okay, so I'm gonna put it to him. So I wait for him to come on, and he says, oh, all the people there at NSA, they're all really good people and all this. And I said, I agree totally. The vast majority of people there are hardworking, dedicated, patriotic people trying to do the job to help people. My problem was with NSA management when they started to spy on every US citizen and everybody else in the world. And he said, but it's all legal. And I said, if you're talking about the FISA court, that's the Foreign Intelligence Court. What part of foreign is domestic? And I was just trying to put him on the spot. So he after that, he never said a word. So I went on and said, all this stuff needs to be argued out in the Supreme Court, out in the open, where everybody can see it. And then you have a ruling on whether or not you're allowed to do this or not. Because it's the violation of the Fourth Amendment and all this. So, let's have it out in the open and be transparent about it. So after that, Geraldo Rivera ended the show. And then we went on the podcast, to find a copy of it so we could say, here, listen to this. And he deleted that podcast. Geraldo Rivera did. Because of his dear friend, this is how they cover up. Mainstream media is a part of this. They're all covering up for it. It was Casey, the director of CIA, who said we have an effort to infiltrate the media, and you'll know how successful we've been when 70% of what they believe is false. So that was back he said that in the early 80s, okay? So all of that, and that's why the mainstream media they won't show any of this. They won't show, I gave Fox, the New York Times, all these tap points and locations and everything. They should publish that, but none of them did. The only one who would show the Fairview slide, what's his name? I'll think of it. But at any rate, he was the only one to do it. It was on, cable TV.
All right here in the white shirt, please.
For many Canadians, in the post-9/11 period, the face of the modern whistleblower has come to really just mean Chelsea Manning, Julian Assange, Edward Snowden, all standing on the shoulders of people like Daniel Ellsberg. But these are all figures who, in one way or another, really did challenge American state power. I was hoping you could share with us a little bit what you feel the role of the modern whistleblower is in protecting democratic rights.
They're central to it. Where else are you going to learn about all these violations of your rights? You're not going to get it from your government. They're the ones violating it. So the only view you have and the only transparency is from a whistleblower. That's why I participate in at least once a month. I go on to Joe Loria, who is the editor of Consortium News, has a program from 4 to 7 every Friday to people who come on and talk about justifying what Julian Assange has done. That's why I go on there, because Julian Assange is one of the main places you can get the truth, And so what they're after him because he exposed their crimes. That's the problem with him. So and part of that was Chelsea Manning, the data that she gave out. I mean, if you looked at the collateral murder clip that's on the web, it's clearly a crime, a military crime. And it's not even a war there. I mean, look, those people were just walking along with no guns. They just shot them all. Then they used the double tap principle. The double tap principle, and if you know this or not, once you hit the target, you wait. Then if people come around, you assume they're also part of it because they're trying to help, then you kill them too. That's what they do with drones with 2 missiles. That's what they did with the helicopter gunship. They waited till somebody came around, and some poor guy stopped to try to help this guy bleeding on the street, in his car with his kids, taking him to school. And then they killed him and wounded his kids. I mean, this is insane. These are war crimes. And yet nobody's doing anything. Why? Because they're all part of it.
Okay, down here at the end.
Yeah.
Hi. I had a question concerning your recent work on the Russiagate stuff.
Okay.
Namely with the VIPS memos and stuff, which I'm, full disclosure, fully on board with what you produce.
Mm-hmm.
But I was curious as if you could explain some of your small faction of colleagues that disagreed with it. Maybe explain the merits of their argument and also maybe why they're wrong.
Well, why they have no substance, you mean? Yeah. Well, for the Russiagate, we looked at only published data, like the Guccifer 2 data that was posted on the web. And looking at that, we calculated all the transfer rates for every file that was transferred. And the highest rate we had at that point was 49.1 megabytes per second. So we basically knew that that couldn't go across the international web to Russia. And they were claiming, Guccifer 2 was claiming it was a hack from Russia. So that means you come across the web, get into a system, then drain it out. Well, it can only go at a certain speed across the web. The web only allows you a certain amount of space. They don't allow you to take up any large fiber, for example. You're not allowed, you're only allowed a certain limited amount of space. And I calculated what that was. We said it wouldn't go across, and we had a few people. I referred to them as the mentally impaired by emotion people. Because they're so emotional.
Mentally impaired by?
Emotion.
Okay.
Because they're so emotionally attached to this argument that because they don't like Trump. Well, okay, if you don't like Trump, fine. But you still have to be objective about evidence, and this is the only evidence we had for Guccifer 2. So when we looked at that, we calculated the high speed rate, and we had a lower speed rates. We had them all of them. So we showed the distribution of it. And then we said, well, this wouldn't go across the web. And some of our people disagreed. They said, well, on this network, they're talking about local networks that are high speed and so on, where they can do a large transfer. But going across the web means, thousands of miles. And you don't have that kind of capacity all the way over to Europe, let alone to Russia. So we said, well, okay, if you want to do that, we're going to try it. So we're going to say, okay, let's have an experiment to see how fast we can get that data across. So I had a hacker in Europe that was willing to do it. He traveled around a bit, so I gave him the opportunity to look at different places. So we tried it from Belgrade, Yugoslavia, from Albania, from the Netherlands in a couple of places, and from the UK for data centers. And the fastest we got for that transfer was between 2 data centers, one in the US and one in New Jersey. One in London and one in New Jersey. So that one gave us 12 megabytes per second, less than 1/4 the necessary capacity to transmit that data on the highest rate. So we knew it wasn't being transmitted over there. So that told us that. And then we looked at the data that he put out. And if you looked at that data, there were 2 sets, one dated the 5th of July and one dated the 1st of September. So if you looked at it and just looked at minutes and seconds, those 2 files merged like this without a conflict. Now, the random probability of that being possible is pretty low. It's like, if for any given second, they all have to be taken in order too. It's like 1 chance in 60 seconds here, 1 chance in 60 ending by the next file that comes from the first group, when it starts, and then at the end, you know, you have the 1 in 60 and then 1 in 60 start and end, 1 in 61. So you ended up with like, there were 9 batches, and those 9 batches fit together with the previous data like that. So that was one chance in 60 to the, 60 to the 9th times 2 to the 18th power. Just of randomly doing that. So that told us, just from the data, there's no emotion here at all. It's all just fact. This is random, this is forensics analysis, you know. It's just the data. Anybody can do this. You can go check this, you know. You can validate it. So, but that told us that Goosler 2 made one database poll, separated into 2, and set out 2 batches, saying one coming later, saying that once he put the first one out, you know, he thought they would try to do protections to stop him. That was the idea behind the thought. And the second one was to say, you can't do anything about it. I've got the data anyway. So you can't stop me. So that told us he was manipulating the data, which told us he was faking it. So he was a fake. We knew it didn't go transatlantic, but all those speeds were compatible with a download to a thumb drive.
All right. Let's see, one more question.
So we
down
rejected
here.
his argument, you know, just based on the facts.
Have you again.
Bill, the U.S. has been pretty open about its regime change operation in Venezuela right now. There was just a widespread blackout that lasted several days. Now Maduro has actually pointed to allegedly evidence of U.S. intelligence interference with the electrical grid. Talk about if that's a possibility and what agency you think would be carrying that out.
Oh, sure. I mean, that's an absolute possibility. I mean, the Vault 7 and Vault 8 data can show all kinds of attacks on, you know, grids and servers, switches, you know, networks, everything. It's basically all that stuff they call cybersecurity. They don't fix them because they want to look into what everybody's doing. And when they don't fix them, everybody's vulnerable. So when, you know, some other country, I mean, they have no monopoly on smart people. You know, somebody's going to find that somewhere in China, Russia, Germany, somewhere. And so, you know, when they attack, they can get through. So the point is they don't fix those things because that gives them ability to get into things, right? What they don't understand, so can other people. And that's why we had the hack on the OPM, you know, all the data on everybody in the U.S. that ever had a classified clearance. All that data, the SF-86, which is your entire life history, organization, where you worked, everything, and supervisors and all that. So it allowed them to reconstruct the entire intelligence community of the United States, including, you know, where everybody worked, all the members of all the embassies around the world, everything. They now know who they are and how, you know, who they work for. So yeah, it's absolutely possible. So, I mean, that's the thing they should fix. The first swindle was, in my mind anyway, the first swindle was you have to give up privacy for security. Absolute swindle. They already knew that too. It just was a matter of gaining power, control, and money. And the second one was cybersecurity. You know, they knew all these weaknesses, they didn't fix them. And so when somebody got attacked, but you know, they kept coming out saying, we need more money for cybersecurity. Right. Why don't you fix the problems you have? Then maybe we'll have some cybersecurity. That's the real issue. But they don't want to do that because it gives them the ability to poke into what other people are doing. And the third one is the Russiagate, the attempt to create a new Cold War for a few more $1 trillion, you know. So I didn't talk about the latest one, which showed that the DNC data was downloaded to a thumb drive. That's the posted DNC data by WikiLeaks. We went in to analyze that and found that the last modified times on all of the files that we looked at, 500, you know, plus, we only went to the first 500 and gave up. So because it was all consistent, the times ending for the last modified were all even, ending in even numbers. That's a function of a fat file format. It will round everything off to the nearest even number, which means that's what evidence of download to a thumb drive or a CD-ROM. That's the storage program to download to its storage device. So, and we found it all on all 500 we looked at, which means the random probability of that happening is 2 to the 500th power, which is like 1 chance out of 1 followed by 150 zeros at base 10. You know, pretty small. So we said, you know, obviously these were downloaded to a thumb drive and transferred physically for some distance before WikiLeaks posted them. So we gave that as evidence to the president's lawyers, as well as published it.
All right, we have 2 questions here, and then I think that'll probably be all the time that we have. Let's see what we have here. Thank you. Yeah.
Thanks, Bill. When it comes to the mainstream media, just to follow up on the questions about Russiagate, and you know, I think a lot of us kind of looked at this whole thing and went like, this is impossible in the first place. You have a group of people like CNN, MSNBC, Young Turks, whatever, on one side. You have guys like Dan Bongino, Fox News on the other side. The truth is the truth, whether you like it or not.
Right.
What is going on? Why can't these two talk? Like, is this deliberately divisive? Are they doing this on purpose in order to create something? Or is it something else? Is it just basically everyone's just losing their minds because we're at that point?
Mixture of all that. But anyway, no, think of it this way. CIA infiltrated the mainstream media, right? So they're giving the narrative from CIA, not necessarily the president. Mm-hmm. So, and they're a part of the deep state, they're a part of the nonviolent coup attempt to get rid of Trump. Some of that's coming out between it was all between those people in the Department of Justice and the FBI. They were all part of this soft coup, if you want to call it that. So, but they failed at that, and now they're being exposed. And so I think you're going to see a lot more on that coming out.
That actually scares me.
Yeah.
I think this scares a lot of people because a lot of us realize that this whole thing is a joke. But the problem is that I don't know if the world is ready to hear this. I think they're just going to lose their mind.
Yeah, well, I mean, the point is we have to tell them openly and expose it. I mean, otherwise they have no chance of knowing. They'll just fumble along blindly, following the bell. Who's got the bell, you know? It's like how you control people. That's what I meant about control. I mean, you select only certain information that they allow the public to know. That way they're uninformed or misinformed. Either way. I mean, in the intelligence, we call that disinformatio or manipulatia. These are standard procedures for intelligence. Standard. I mean, it goes back hundreds of years.
May I have 2 questions?
Oh, I think that we're actually at time. Okay. So I just wanted to ask one final question, and then I think we have to wrap up. So we're at a university. What lessons or advice can you share with students who are thinking about how to channel their energies after leaving university?
Well, I think wherever you go to work, you need to carry values and principles with you. And make sure they don't, you know, the first thing they try to do is corrupt your values and integrity. Okay? That's the first thing they try. You have to fit in with the organization and its theme. I never did that at NSA. I mean, they didn't get rid of me because I was solving all kinds of things that they couldn't do. And so they kept me around, you know. So that's the reason they did anyway. So, because they were afraid if I left that they wouldn't be able to do these things, you know. So that's the way I survived. But not everybody can. You have to be careful how you want to survive in your organization, right? So I would say you have to try to maintain your integrity and principles of, you know, and values somehow, and try to maybe influence that organization to change in that direction too. I mean, that's the only thing we have to try. You could try to do it from the bottom up, I guess, is what I'm talking about. I believe in infiltration, in other words.
All right, well, everyone please join me in thanking Bill.
Yeah. Thank you.